So yeah, I'm really excited about this. What I want to start out by doing is kind of going through this terms, right? Talking about what theory of mind is, because parents might have an idea, or people watching may have an idea what it is, but not exactly sure specifically, and may not be familiar with the terminology. And again, talking about, what skill instruction is, what cooperative play is, what group reflection is, and then going into it some more of the process and like what you look at for in a game and how it's actually implemented. And anything, like any suggestions that you could have for parents or caretakers or teachers that they could do this a little less informally, right? And
Yes.
got a lot of positive feedback about the doing like this school lunchtime gaming group type of thing. I'm just talking about like how that can be seen in a school environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to go.
Anything that I didn't say that you want brought up?
No, we'll just follow your lead and quite happily, and we'll always happy to jump in.
Okay, sounds good. All right, hello everyone. Happy Saturday, or sorry, no time zone is it Saturday, but happy Sunday if you're in North America, and happy Monday morning if you're in Australia side of things. I'm so excited today. I have the opportunity to go live with Dr. Matt Harrison and Jess Rawlings, and we're going to be talking about some of Matt's research on using video gaming as a way to help support social skill development. And together with Jess, they work together at Next Level Social Skills. And I'm really excited about the things that they do there. So can you take a moment and tell us exactly what is Next Level Social Skills?
Yeah, thank you for having us, Catherine. Very nice to be here, and hello to everyone around the world watching. So yes, Next Level Social Skills is really exciting. It's a social venture started by Jess and myself that really focuses on using cooperative video games as tools for helping support workers, including teachers and speech and language pathologists like Jess, to be able to help our children to acquire and to practice the use of collaborative social skills. That's really what we focus on, the idea of what we call these essential collaborative social skills. And it's a point Jess and I always make is we're not about fixing broken children. We're all about teaching every child, but particularly our neurodiverse students, these skills that everyone needs to be able to work as part of a team, to work and to be able to access employment, to be able to be community organisers, and to have that sort of social empowerment that we know that is essential to positive life outcomes.
Yeah, of course. And, many people struggle with social skills. They are things that you need experience and exposure in to develop. And some of our exceptional individuals, such as those with autism, learning disabilities, ADHD, Down syndrome, and other exceptionalities, need that extra little bit of support and sometimes that explicit nature of instruction to help develop these skills so they know what to do in that situation. And I think everybody can relate to being in a social situation and not sure of what they should do, what they should say, or how they should do it. And what I really like about how you guys go about this is finding something that the individual is already interested in. So they have that automatic buy-in. So if you go to a kid and say, okay, we're going to, teach you how to do this, whether you like it or not, and I don't really care if you're interested about what we're doing and how we're doing it, you're not going to have much success. It's, fighting up in arms, you're not going to have success. But if you have a gamer and you say, hey, can we play some video games together? They're going to be much more like, okay, I'm going to tell you a couple things we'll do it if I have to. Right?
I think you're so right there, Catherine. That's really why we started this. My background is I'm a teacher and I work with kids in what's called a special development school. And the problem we encountered, and this is really like what led me down the path of my heart of research, is they could tell you until the cows come home about what these definitions, what does negotiation mean? They could give you a very cookie cutter definition of negotiation because they'd been told and they memorized this definition over multiple years. But when it actually came to the point of need and recognizing the context in which this skill of negotiation, or these micro skills were needed, they really struggled. And so the idea, I'm a gamer, so I thought, and I'm sure Jess has had very similar experiences in her line of work. We thought, well, let's build from an area where they already have language around. They already have an understanding of the cultural norms of gaming and of gamers, gaming groups. And it's something in which they are really, a lot of the kids that I work with are really skilled. They really have a high skill level. So if you build from these strengths and they've already got this oral language and they already understand some of the social norms of gaming culture, but this is just such a rich, fertile ground for them to be able to address some of their areas of challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not, I mean, this is one thing that we do steer around, is that a lot of the kids that I work with have a formal label of autism or ADHD, but a lot of the kids that I work with don't have that formal label, but they've still got the same functional needs. They just need that extra support. And I know you're an expert in the idea of reading instruction and learning to read. We talk about biologically primary and biologically secondary knowledge. There's this theory from Geary, and something that really resonates with me is that for many kids, they do through modeling, they do naturally learn social skills from being exposed to people around them. But for many kids, they do require explicit direct instruction in what the context in which you use a particular skill, the value of that skill, how you know that you've successfully used that skill. And it's not just children with differences or disabilities, but there's kids from other cultures coming in. And like, we know social skills are culturally normed. Like, I lived in South Korea and I had to learn a whole new set of social etiquettes and social rules. And there's nothing wrong with our kids. It's just like learning to speak a different language. It's just something that we really say, there's nothing wrong with, I speak German and you speak French. And there's nothing wrong with German or French. It's just we have to be able to learn to operate in a world that's neurotypically normed. And Jess, I'm sure you've got a lot to add here.
Yeah. I was just thinking of whether I should tell the basketball story or not. Where,
Please.
so I had a boy in clinic, sort of early high school age, and we were doing some social skills therapy. And the activity was normed around basketball. So, like, how would you, if you were in a sports team, what would you do? But the thing is this boy actually had no interest, even remotely, in basketball. It was such, and without, taking into the fact that it's such a controlled, I guess, rigid environment, in a clinic room with structured prompting. It was just so outside anything that he would ever usually engage in. And, it sort of, I guess, made me think, how is this kid meant to generalize skills and, use these skills that he's learning in clinic when they're not something that's related to something he'll use in everyday life. They're not related to his interests, which, ironically actually were sort of more gaming based. But yeah, just the fact that, for this kid, the skills that he was being taught in clinic were so difficult for him to apply across other situations, and it was in an environment that was unnatural to him as well, a completely unfamiliar topic.
Well, and I'm sure there's another thing that a lot of people don't think of is these individuals may actually have the skills in that gaming environment, right? And they can use it when they're in that mindset, but it's a matter of helping them generalize or transfer them to other settings. So also something that you can say, well, and this is another thing that I get, like, a lot of the times when we see individuals with ADHD, when they have that hyperfocus, well, it's not something that they necessarily can transfer, but there are ways that we might be able to help them foster the movement from one area to another, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is one of those things we talk about, like transportation, about how do we transport, because we know that the wrapping for a social skill will change around the social context. And so the way that I would speak with you, Catherine, in a formal, I guess, sort of discussion like this would be very different from like sitting down and having a beer at the pub. We shift our language, we shift our social expectations, we shift the way we use integrate our verbal and non-verbal communication. The gestures that I use, I'm a very pronounced gesturer when I speak in public, but maybe on Zoom I've wound it back a bit. It is very interesting how we do change based on the social context, and that I guess that sort of physical location as well is a big part of that. So it is knowing to read the environment as well as to read the person you're interacting with, which is hard to teach.
Definitely. And I know one strategy that I often have used is teaching like schemas. So in this setting, this is what I do, right? And kind of say, okay, so this is kind of the process that you're going to use. And I'm sure it's used in a lot of different therapies, but I don't know, I have a computer sciencey background and math, and like, okay, so this is the formula for you. This is how we're going to find success. So if they're able to develop that in a gaming setting and see just the little alterations that they need to do to make it, in a social setting when you're in this situation. But before we go too much into our discussion about gaming and social skills, I was hoping that we could take a little bit to review some of the terminology, because while many people might be familiar with these ideas, they may not be familiar with the labels that we're using. So one of them that I know is huge for a lot of people is theory of mind. And it's a concept that most people can understand once they get the definition of it. It's, being able to realize that not everybody's inside your head and knows what you're thinking, right?
Yes.
And just because you know something, someone else may not. So do you want to just give your elevator speech on theory of mind?
Yes, absolutely. I will define it as I guess wearing my teacher hat. And Jess, please feel free to jump in wearing your SLP hat. But so for theory of mind, it's the ability to attribute mental states to ourselves and others. And when we think about this, it's really the term cognitive empathy. And this is something that I really try to emphasize in my classes. I also train teachers in working and supporting students and learners with autism. And one of the big misconceptions is that our students or our children don't have emotional empathy. And we say, no. If they see me sad and upset, they have many of the kids that I work with have a deep empathy for me. Like sometimes on the extreme end of the scale, they feel horrible for me. They see that I'm upset. But it's the idea of cognitive empathy is that may not be able to connect the environment, what they know about my past, and my emotional response or my state of mind around why I may be. And it's also true for some learners, for themselves as well. They don't understand why they're having a particular response. And they may not understand why I'm thinking a certain thing, why they're thinking a certain thing based on those environmental impact factors, those environmental cues. Classic example is the idea that I'm into Star Wars. I just assume that everyone else would also love and be excited by Star Wars, and that's I've seen with a lot of the children I work with, or the teenagers I work with. They have a really intense, strong interest in something, and it's the idea that they may not be able to pick up on those contextual cues that another person in their class doesn't have that shared interest until it's explicitly said, I don't like Star Wars. So they're not able to pick up on those subtle hints or those sort of contextual indicators that someone does not share their love of Darth Vader. I personally do love Darth Vader. Luckily, Jess does as well. That's very good. But not everyone does. Jess, is there anything I've missed that you'd like to add?
No, I think you've pretty much absolutely covered it, Matt. There's nothing I can really add to that.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to add one more piece that might be an example that, is outside of the intense interest. But if a child has something set in their mind, okay, we're going to do, this order of things, right? Or when I get a pencil, I want to get this pencil. And they're given that pencil and the world is over, but they may not realize it. The person giving them the pencil doesn't know the exact pencil that they wanted, or the exact juice cup or something like this. And this is a way that you can just kind of understand where you get these meltdowns and the kids completely lose control, because in their regimented way of doing things, they had a specific thing in mind, and they just don't have that awareness all the time to say, no, this is the one you need to give me.
Yes. it's that assumed for a lot of our students that sort of that assumption that this is where so many of the misunderstandings which result in meltdowns. I had when I was my past career, I was a digital technologies teacher in a special development school, which is a school for kids with complex behaviours or complex needs. And what I'd often find is I'd have different colour iPad cases, and it was exactly like you're saying with the pencil example, that I was trying to find out why someone would be so upset when they were given their iPad. And it wasn't the iPad, it was the coloured case. And they were associating that case with particular apps that were on that iPad. So it was just really having to understand that function of that behavior and sort of to work out what's going on here. Why is the fact that I'm giving them a red case instead of a blue case causing this distress? And it's really one of those things where we really have to understand and investigate and be those sort of, I guess, we say behavioral detectives, trying to find out what's going on here and how can we preempt the situation? How can we support the learner? That those communication differences in the fact that we may assume someone will tell us if something's wrong, but that's not always the case, or they'll tell us in a way that we don't understand as teachers or as therapists.
Well, and that's another thing, and it's a matter of knowing their inner language. And I know this isn't exactly theory of mine, but I can think of an example where I know an individual that instead of asking for something, they'll tell you why they need it. Right? So, yes. Like if they want you to get a jacket for them or they want to put on the jacket, I'm shivering cold. Okay, well, that's great. No, I'm really shivering cold. And then just telling them, okay, so I understand what you're saying, but tell me what you want me to do about it. Right? And it's just that lost in translation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So now I want to focus more on some of the terms that we're going to talk about when we're talking about the intervention and the strategies that you use. And let me start off with, so your strategy or your implementation has 3 different stages. It starts off with skill instruction, then leading to the collaborative play and the group reflection. Can you kind of just take us what those mean before we talk about how you do it?
Yeah, of course. And I think a really important thing, and I learned this, probably the hard way, is the need for a lot of the children I work with, and not necessarily just the neurodiverse students, but a lot of students who had histories of trauma and challenges, in other parts of their lives, was the need for routine and creating a predictable, safe environment. So we do use a consistent structure, and that's this idea of having 3 set stages and maintaining that consistency session to session, because that way students know what they're doing now and what they're doing next. And of course, we structure everything using a visual activity schedule so they can see what we're doing, how long we've been doing it for, and when are we moving on to the next stage. And the first stage we always start with, after our welcome, of course, and our hello and checking in, is the skill instruction. And this is the idea that games do not teach social skills. They create the conditions for learning, but it's us as the interventionists, so Jess and myself and the people we work with, who teach social skills. And we use a combination of video modeling for explicit instruction, where we unpack what is each skill, what does it look like in this context, and why would you use it? What are the positive consequences of using this skill? And these are things like, and these are really these high-level constructs like turn taking. Really break it down. What is turn taking? Using your voice to give instructions. Using non-verbal communication, because we want to be inclusive. We want people who don't, who prefer to not speak, to have other ways of communicating. Ways of asking for help. And so we actually teach these skills using video footage from the previous session that we've edited together, and we create positive instances where we actually show the different steps in a player using this skill in the context of playing games, asking for help, and then we show the positive consequence. We actually teach the how, the why, and what happens next after this skill has been used. And it's really That's really key, as I was sort of speaking about before, because a lot of our students, they can tell you the definition, but they can't tell you the why, and they can't tell you the explicit steps in performing a skill. The second part of the stage A skill instruction is the idea of video review. So we have a look at some focus skills. Then we actually go back and play an edited recording of the previous session where the kids were playing games together. And we actually have a look. It's a bit like, I know, I'll be inclusive for our Canadian audience here. So it's about like watching the hockey tape or the football tape of the game. And we identify instances of when they've used the skills, the players, and we ask them why. And this is really important because we ask them why you've used a particular skill here or why you chose not to use a skill. And this really helps us to understand. Then they say, you've met one, you meet a child with autism, you've met one child, and the differences of autism manifest in different ways for different children. Of course, there's cultural factors. So it's really important for us to understand our kids. And so we ask them, like, I noticed you asked to help here. What made you do that? What made you recognize that? And it's the idea of drawing on their sort of experiences as well and seeing how they're interpreting what we're teaching them. And that's so much for us as feedback. That's so important to be able to recognize, like, actually the way how instructions have been interpreted is completely different, or they don't see it as relevant in this context where we see maybe it would have been relevant. So this idea of video modeling, that teaching from us, that explicit teaching, followed by video review, we get them to explain what's going on in the real world to us, is the starting point. Stage B is supported coaching, where we actually play the games, work with the kids to actually play games. We coach them. We let them take the lead at this stage, and we just monitor to see which skills they're using at what points. And then stage C, the final part, is group reflection, where we reflect on the play. We have a look at the data that's been generated. So we actually track during when the students are playing together. We track which skills they've used, and then we look back together as a group and discuss which skills did we use as a team. In stage A, we've set a team goal. Did we accomplish the team goal? And then goal setting for the next week. Which skill do you want to focus on next week? And then it's this big, it's very much a big cycle process. Stage A, skill instruction. Stage B, supported play. Stage C, group reflection. Set the goals, and they're the goals we look at for stage A next session.
Awesome. Well,
yes,
I think what I really like that is how you're giving them examples, because I find so many children get that like flashcard drill of skills into them, right? So they know the term, they can give you the definition on the back, but that's about it. It's that actual implementation of what it means outside that drill deck situation, and that's hard. And having the video games being able to support through that and using their own use of it can really help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said earlier, we choose commercially developed games. We choose very carefully our games, and I'll speak on that a little bit later, what we choose. But all these games are cooperative games where they have to work together. It's the team versus the computer world. Mm-hmm. And these are games that are high production values. They're family-friendly games, of course. We are. Jess and I are educators. They're not playing Grand Theft Auto. We promise you that. But these are games that create the conditions. So you can leave no person behind. You can't leave a player behind. You have to work together. And they promote or manufacture social interaction, situations for social interaction, where they have to interact with each other in the physical world. We have all the players sitting together in the same room, and that's how we film them. But also we think it's really important they can read those non-verbal cues as well. Because everyone's looking at the one screen and they've got different controllers together, they're not looking at each other, but they're checking in to see what each other are doing in the physical environment. And then we record what's happening in the physical environment during stage B, the cooperative play, but we also record what's happening on the screen. So we can see the relationship. And this is as a researcher, this is fascinating. What's happening in the game world, what's happening in the physical world, and how the game creates those situations. They're so clever. Some of the games we've chosen, when we've analysed the footage and had a look, and you can see what sort of situations create the most interactions between the players and create the most time opportunities for Jess and I to support them in trying skills at a higher level of sophistication. So how can we show turn taking in a more complex way? How can they combine different discrete skills together to be able to, negotiate an outcome of who gets to go on the platform in the game first? It's really, as a researcher, it's fascinating. As a teacher, it's such a valuable space for social learning for our kids.
Yeah, and of course, when you get those light bulb moments, you're like, oh, they get it now, and you can see it in their face. And I'm sure working in a group setting, when they kind of make those connections, it's that much more authentic for them.
And when you watch them, and Jess is going to have a lot to add to this, but the idea of theory of mind we talked about earlier, and attributing mental states to ourselves and others, it's actually the way that they communicate, they understand or don't understand what the other players are doing through their actions, through the play, is really interesting. But then you have other students who can recognize that another player doesn't understand what the team's thinking, and this idea of the team, the collective. So they'll actually articulate, they recognize that this person doesn't know what the goal is, or they don't understand why the team is using a certain strategy. And to see them over time develop the vocabulary, but also develop the skills to be able to check for understanding and to check that they understand the game and the task it's a nice moment. We see, all right, we're making progress. This is great. They understand that not everyone will understand what they're thinking. And you can see that through the way they'll call a timeout. We have timeout cards.
Oh, okay.
And they'll really stop and think, and they'll really kind of rehearse what they're about to say to the team. And you can see them sort of gathering their thoughts, getting the language right. It's very cute if you're working with the young kids in particular. But yeah, it is. It's really, really interesting because you can actually see the emotional regulation as well happening. Them using these strategies to calm down. They're very excited, or they're very stressed because of the game. And you can see them using all the strategies that we've taught them in stage A. They sort of start to be implemented at the point of need when they're emotionally heightened, which is the key.
Of course.
Yeah.
Jess, did you have something to add?
I was more just going to touch on the fact that as Matt said, it's really interesting to see, especially in terms of the kids' self-regulation as they start to develop those skills. Like when I've run social skills groups before, we've had kids that would start off the week, sort of really struggling. Lots of little things would put them into quite a high state of anxiety, like things like loud noise. But you actually see and especially in intensive type programs too, as you get through the week, you actually see that the kids start to learn and self-regulate their own emotions. So you can see, and I had one boy who, at the start of the week was, we were nearly every 15 minutes having to go out because he was really, overwhelmed. He was in an unfamiliar place and it was a lot for him to take in. And then sort of by day 3, he would actually go and take himself out for a timeout. If he needed it, he'd just say, I'm going to go and sit out in the hall. That was fine. Would take the time he needed to just calm down, get himself back to a state where he felt he could come back into the room again and bring himself back in. And that was really, that was such a big difference to see, considering from the first day, he was getting to the point of, nearly in tears over some things that were just overwhelming. So it's a really good thing to see. And it's, as Matt said, it's a really nice moment to see that the kids, have now gotten to this stage that they can, manage themselves enough to be able to take the time out if they need it.
Yeah, well, and I could see this as being something that you could create mentors from within your program, right? So the kids that go through the program can then help mentor other students at the schools or wherever the intervention takes place. And I know one of the things that I think was one of the quotes from your website that said, a lunchtime club for students with neurological differences like autism found many of the students saw themselves as gamers, and some felt like they belonged to their school community when playing with their friends in this club. And I think that's huge if we're able to have that peer tutoring type of environment right? Where they have support. And if you get this going at a school, you're constantly going to have that flow of students. Here, high school's 4 years.
Yes. So this is such an important part. And I said that we're a social, when I introduced next level social skills, I said we're a social venture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really one of our primary objectives is we do want to maybe change the way that game-based learning was perceived and how it could be used in a more structured way to support our neurodiverse students. But it's also our other goal is to actually employ people with lived experiences of autism. There's a huge problem in Australia. I'm not sure whether this is similar in Canada, but there's chronic unemployment of people who are autistic or have a diagnosis of ADHD. And there's a whole host of environmental barriers, and prejudice that stops people from getting employed. And what we're aiming to do is to actually employ 50% of our staff members with lived experiences of autism or ADHD or neurodiversity, because we want it to be a program that really teaches the skills that everyone needs to be able to function in a neurotypically normed world, to be able to self-advocate and to be able to join a team, but also celebrate some of the differences and said that you're not less than people who don't have these labels, because there is so much anxiety, and a lot of the young kids I work with, there's a lot of self-loathing. And it's heartbreaking. It starts from a very young age. They just want friends. So yes, the teaching is really powerful, and I think it's really important. But also the idea of having a space where a safe space people can come and build friendships, and to be experts for once. I had a young student who had a diagnosis of Down syndrome. He was joining this, and he was part of the lunchtime club, and he was really, really good at Mario Kart. And so this is outside of our program. This is just me as a teacher having a gaming club, and he became known this is an inclusive mainstream school, and he became known. He stopped being known as the boy with Down syndrome, started being known as the kid who's really good at Mario Kart. And for his peers to see him as something more than just a label was such a nice thing. And so you'd be on yard duty, and you'd hear, this is our lunchtime, so making sure the kids are safe and playing. You'd hear kids speaking to him, asking him about the shortcuts in the Mario Kart and the Wii. And it's just that fact that he's being spoken to as an equal.
Yeah.
Or as someone who's got valuable knowledge or some sort of insight that they don't have and they want to learn from him. It made him feel, you could just see the smile on his face, and it put a smile on my face. You could see him being treated as a regular kid rather than this kid is known as a student with a disability or a difference. And it's one of those things with our program that Jess and I really wanted, was we wanted kids to feel like they're different but not less, in a way. For kids, yes, they do have these differences, and that's fine. But we want them to be part of the community. We want them to feel like they have a place, a valued place within society. They have a valued place within our community, and that they can make friends and they can have these social connections. And that yeah. Jess, did you want to add anything here?
I think like, again, Matt, you pretty much covered it. But I think what you sort of said was, even if a kid comes to the program and learns, absolutely nothing, but they come out with a friend, that's still a massive win. So yeah,
a lot of the kids we work with, they do feel lonely, and there's this misconception that, and I mean, I'm probably the wrong person to be speaking about this, but there's a misconception that people don't want social interaction, and that they're happy feeling alone. The way that in which they interact may be different, and the way that they engage in social interactions may be different. But I think it's an innately human thing that we need that connection. And most people want to be around people, or they want to have some sort of sense that someone else is looking out for them or cares for them.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. That was.
I think it's another point where you can bring up the quality versus quantity of friendship. And I think this is one thing, at least that I've noticed, that individuals with neurodiversity aren't aware of. That yes, it may look like someone's very popular and very social and has all these people that are around them, but they're not necessarily deep, true friendships, right? But then the neurodiverse individual has maybe one or two people, but they're really tight and they know everything about each other, and they know that they're going to be there 100% of the time. But this, the most popular kid in school, no one really knows them like that. Or maybe they do, but just using that as an example.
Yeah.
Right? Having that opportunity to tell them, like, yeah, maybe it looks cool, but it's not the same thing.
It is, absolutely. And I started my career teaching in primary, lower primary. And kids are wonderful. I really, it's one of those things where it's sort of like, I'm very optimistic for the future. As a teacher, I'd walk around and I'd see our kids and I just think, wow, how far we've come in terms of social inclusion. Whether you're talking about, things like race or sexuality or, labels of disability, kids are so accepting of everyone. And then I guess, unfortunately, social culture sort of comes in, and this idea of wanted to be seen a particular way. And so it's what we would call upper primary. We don't have middle school in Australia, or in most settings. We have primary school from foundation or kindergarten to year six, and then 7 to 12. And I think it sort of starts around year 6 that people start realizing what's cool and what's not. And so when someone has different interests and they don't conform to what a particular group thinks that person should be into, that's when you have a lot of the social isolation beginning. And I'd like to think that as people mature, around 16, 17, they start realizing that there are differences. I do think we are at a point where our kids will recognize neurodiversity, and they will be way more accepting of the differences of autism. I see that already, accepting of disability in general, and the fact that people want to be included. I'm optimistic for the future. Jess, optimism?
This has been going because I don't know if Matt said I'm autistic myself. Even what you said on the friendships, the quality versus quantity, I was just sitting there thinking the fact that me and my best friend will sit in a room and read a book next to each other, greatest hangout ever. And yeah, we do. We know everything about each other. We've been joined at the hip for nearly 7 years. And as you said, I would be younger and I would think, these people have so many friends. But then I also look at the fact that most of those friendships have not maintained for, more than a couple of years after school at the most. What were you touching on, Matt? Sorry.
No, I was just saying about the future, about with kids, about how I think, I don't want to, I think you're probably the best person to speak about this. But I know when I was at high school, there was, I don't know if this is your experience in Canada as well, Catherine, but there probably was not a recognition of neurodiversity, and that did manifest a lot more in bullying and things like that. I am neurotypical, so I didn't experience that, but I saw it.
100%, and I think especially if we look at sort of the social conditions for girls as compared to boys too, the fact that for autistic girls who are already very much less awareness, very underdiagnosed, but the fact that the teenage girl social world is so much more governed by those unwritten rules and that sort of subtle, more non-verbal communication between each other, because teenage boys will often go and fight it out, or they're a lot more direct. But in terms of, the girl's social structure, that sort of thing, it is a lot more non-verbal, I guess, which makes it a lot harder because instead of, a boy straight out telling you this really sucks, I guess girls can often more exclude, that more sort of subtle different treatment. I think it has, as I said, as Matt said, especially in primary school students, the kids are amazing. I've had kids and they're so funny because they don't care. They get their answer and they move on. I've had kids ask me all sorts of I'm sorry, my dog's just sneezing. Ask all sorts of very personal questions and that. And then once they get their answer, once they get their facts, they're like, oh, all right, do you want to see my paper airplane? So I think we have moved definitely, especially in kids, towards more of a culture of just acceptance and I guess maintaining that throughout. As Matt said, the later primary years, early high school, when people start to work out what's cool and what's not.
Yeah, and it definitely is going in the right direction, but it's a matter of, at least over here, that the hyper awareness. And I know in some research where we have, the individuals that are very aware of like the executive functioning and the hot and cool EF, they then use it as a way to attack. Yeah. Right. So there's this mixed bag, but I think we're definitely a lot further ahead than we were in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. It's definitely a positive way. So I was hoping we could talk about how this actually gets implemented, and how you get the group together, how many people are in the group, what type of games are great for this.
Yeah, of course. So we start, like, I developed this through schools in my background as a teacher, and we've found in terms of optimal numbers, Jess and I target 6 to 7 in a group of kids. We want it to be big enough that there is a group situation, and there's not just that sort of one-to-one sort of interaction. There is an actual group there working together. We also we use typically games that have sort of 3 or 4 players at a time. So we did want there to be an element where there is, I guess, mandated turn taking. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there's 3 or 4 controllers and there's 6 or 7 children, we work out systems for fairness and working out taking turns, but also it actually helps the students who are not controlling the game, but they work on using verbal and non-verbal communication to assist the players who are playing. So we wanted to make sure that there were multiple roles. Everyone knows they're going to have a turn, but everyone knows they're going to have a turn of playing the game, and they're also going to have a turn at supporting the other players using language to be able to give instructions, to be able to check for understanding, and to really focus on those really important communication skills around the idea of the pragmatic skills, like checking for understanding and things like that, skills like that. The types of games we use, we were saying earlier, we have such a range of children that I've worked with. Some children have fine motor skills challenges. Some children really struggle with the third dimension. So we use a lot of Nintendo games. Jess and I are massive Nintendo geeks. We use most Nintendo games are family friendly. They're often multiplayer games. They're often cooperative. They have cooperative modes of play. When I was doing my initial design research where we're developing this program, I would have the kids themselves suggest games. And I gave them the parameters. So, this is a school program, so it's got to have the right age rating. I know that the Canadian and American systems are a bit different in age ratings from us, but ours typically follow like the movies, like same as. So you're not playing MA or R-rated games. That's not a school game. we don't say, that's a game that you might have at home, but we're not going to be playing that game at school because it's not appropriate for school. But we found that most kids love Nintendo, even like young adults love Nintendo. I'm 37. I love Nintendo.
Adults love Nintendo.
Yeah, that's right. So we use games. Some of the games that I've used that have been really effective are things like Raymond Legends, which is a 2-dimensional platform game. It's multiplayer. And the idea is everyone has to move, like the old Super Mario game, from left of the screen, navigate the world to the right. But there's a whole lot of different obstacles in the way. And they require players to stand on switches in certain orders, or to have players, someone has to work as like a human shield, defending projectiles from a monster, while other people have to get past the monster. So they have to really coordinate their actions. There's also a character in that game called Murphy, and Murphy looks like a little fairy that sort of flies around the screen. It's like a mouse cursor. And so I had a boy who had really, really found using a traditional controller really difficult because of his challenges with fine motor, but he loved using a touch screen. And we were using a console called the Nintendo Wii U, which had traditional controllers but also a touch screen you could use. And so he would control this character, Murphy. And Murphy was like a mouse cursor. Murphy could not die. He could go through walls, he'd go through everything, but he couldn't scroll the screen forward. So what he would have to do with Murphy is he'd have to activate switches and turn things on and off. He'd have to tickle monsters by rubbing his finger on the touch screen. It would tickle the monster, and then everyone could run past the monster. So he had a very, very important role, but it catered to his specific needs and specific abilities around using a touchscreen. He also worked with an OT to get better at using a traditional controller. That was a goal that was really meaningful for him, and we were hoping that the interest from using so those button coordination and be able to move his thumb and index finger would actually translate to other skills like holding a pencil. But for him, being able to use a controller was really important. So we would rotate through with him. He'd have a bit of time with the controller. When he said he was tired, which knows he was struggling with using the traditional controller, he could go back to using Murphy. And it's a really accessible experience for him, where he could play the game in a way that it was an equal part of the team, but he would also it met his needs in terms of what he was ready to do in terms of using an interface, a controller. So Raymond Legends. What else, Jess? New Super Mario Brothers U.
So I was the other one I thought it was the new Super Mario Brothers U. We even looked at like some newer ones for Switch and that like Yoshi's Crafted World as well, which just a bit newer. Use similar mechanisms, so co-op, all trying to achieve a common goal.
What's really interesting, Catherine, is the audience, is that we had students bringing their own games in. There was a game called Star Fox Zero, which one of my gamers that I worked with, he absolutely loved. And he also really struggled with, he was still developing his verbal communication, but he had a technical vocabulary from the game, but it was filling in the blanks between when he's giving instructions and the processing of language. He needed additional processing time. And it's one of those moments where this game, you fly a spaceship through a 3D space, and it's like an on-rail roller coaster where you're flying through, navigating through space, and one person's the pilot. They can't slow down, but you can just sort of steer left and right, up and down the screen. You're avoiding like asteroids and other ships coming at you, and one person's shooting at the enemies, the alien invaders. So you're really dependent on your partner fulfilling their role. So this one particular boy loved this game. He was very good, but having to play it with a partner who wasn't so good at the game, for him, was a really frustrating experience because he wanted to tell him what to do, but because there was so much action happening on the screen, he couldn't process the language fast enough to be able to give an instruction at a point of need. So what he did, this is one of those moments you're like, wow, this is actually really clever. Our kid's really clever. He thought back to how did I learn to play this game? And it's through the tutorial mode. So he quit the game. And we're like, oh, okay, all right. So he obviously needs a break. He's like, no, he got the main controller, quit the game, and loaded up the tutorial mission and gave it to his partner. And then he got up and physically was trying to get people to sit around the screen so they could watch the tutorial, because he recognized he didn't have the language to explain what you needed to do to be effective at this game. But he recognized that the game could explain it, what to do. So he gave it to the student who was really struggling. He got everyone to stand around the screen, and he realized what they needed was clear, explicit, direct instruction in how to play the game and the rules of the game and the strategies, because that's how he learned. And I thought that was just such an amazing moment when you realize the limitations of your own language skills, but also how you could get around that. So that was one of those moments you're like, oh, I didn't tell him to do that. That's really clever. And Jess, I was just thinking, just while Catherine's away, I thought the other thing that was really, really interesting was about how games are perceived in some programs. And I thought your story about Minecraft and how it was being used at lunchtime and then it was taken away. Did you want to explain about that?
Yeah. So I was helping run a social skills group, and we had like a bunch of boys, sort of 8 to, or maybe 7 to 12 years old. So sort of that late primary school, early high school sort of age. And for these kids, gaming was quite an interest. They were all absolutely like up to their eyeballs in Minecraft. They loved it. And so we do group-based therapy activities during the day, all very much, the focus of the program was that it was, to be in person and interact face to face. But at lunchtime, the boys would go and get the iPads that we'd had set up, and they'd be playing Minecraft. And the communication going on between these kids, they were, giving each other explicit instructions, conflict resolution, planning strategies, planning, building, and still communicating in a face-to-face way, but just, I guess, with the mechanism of the Minecraft to facilitate that. But in the end, the sort of people who are higher than me said, we still want this to be face-to-face, in person, so they weren't to play the iPads anymore. But it was very interesting to sort of see the level of interaction going on between the kids in something that they all had in common and were interested in, compared to, more, I guess, fixed environment, therapy activities.
Yeah, it's really, I think, and that's the theme that we always say, is that we're strategically choosing games that encourage and promote increased frequency and sophistication of social interactions. We're not just putting them in front of any games. We're being really careful. And part of my research was looking at those, unpacking the characteristics that had the highest frequency and most sophistication of social interaction. And then I'm really exploring, what does this mean? Why does this particular game have them? What is it about the design of this game that has them working in such a way? So we've been working on developing a list of games that we think adhere to these 39 principles that promote collaborative interaction that I developed through my research. And I'm so lucky to have Jess with me because she's got such a rich, lived and professional experience. And it really challenges my thinking, which I think is really healthy when you have someone who's got, that sort of lived experience, but also that professional experience from a different field, from speech pathology rather than from education. Together, I think we're a pretty good team, Jess.
I think you're all right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So if I were a teacher or an interventionist, or some sort of person that wanted to find out more about doing this, what would I do? What would the steps be that I should take? Like, can this be done in a setting, in a school with a couple of teachers that figure it out? Or do you need to have that SLP there to help the language development?
I've learned so much from working with SLPs. I didn't have one for the first 8 years of my teaching career. It was only when I went into a specialist setting that I had access to an OT and a speechy and, as occupational therapist for people who don't know. And working with this team and really each of us bringing our own areas of strength in terms of understanding, education, theories of learning, our own specialized knowledge around, and then having this common goal of helping our students was really, for me, I learned so much. But I didn't have that for the first 8 years. And I did implement these sort of programs in working in inclusive mainstream schools. And it's very doable. So having a team, and teaching's more fun with, the people around you anyway. So having a teaching assistant with a teacher, running a lunchtime club is a great start. That's what I did. I started off with having a teaching assistant who really loved gaming as well. And then we had students, and we had a sort of volunteer program where students could sign up at lunchtimes. And then, we had some students who want to come every week, and some students just want to drop in occasionally. And I think the key for teachers to really think about is having a structure and creating that routine. And I think the three steps we have is quite simple, and you can of course make it work for your setting, but having that, a stage A, which is really around focusing everyone's attention on what are we trying to learn here, for lack of a better term, learning objectives, and what are these skills, and actually teaching what do these skills look like, having the bulk of time to that cooperative play, and the teaching staff working as coaches, saying, not taking over, but just, helping people at the point of need. What we do is we set a timer for 5 minutes, and every 5 minutes we have a timeout.
Mhm.
And that's a time for us. The game is paused. Most consoles now are brilliant. You can pause at any point. When the timer goes off, that's when you switch roles within the team, but also reflect on, let's have a look at, we use a chart to track which skills people have been using. Let's have a look at the skills we've been using and say, oh, look, Andy's been using taking turns a lot. Jess has been using a voice to give instruction. This is wonderful. What are our goals? And just really reiterate what our goals were that we set, at the start of the session. So it brings that focus back to that. Then players also, the kids will often want to talk about strategy without the action. They can emotionally calm down. They can be like, okay, some of these games create very stressful situations. We need to have a little time out and just talk about, okay, so how are we going to defeat Wispy Woods, the boss at the end of level 1? What sort of things can we do? And it really gives them a chance to not have to worry about the action on the screen and to focus around that sort of strategizing and that communication. And checking their understanding of what they should be doing is really important. Jess, what advice do you have? Because I know before working with me, you've run some programs.
Yeah, look, I think this you did touch on it again, but definitely structure and routine, because for the kids, they know what to expect, which takes away a lot of that anxiety, any I'm not sure what's going to be happening, and it helps settle them into a routine from week to week too, that they become comfortable with it, they know what's going to happen, and they know the procedure. Because for a lot of kids, and especially even with intensive programs, even just the behavioural changes in kids from day one when they're in a completely unfamiliar environment to even sort of day 3 and 4, a Wednesday and Thursday, when they're more familiar with the people in the group, they know sort of what to expect in the day. It's a really big change. So I think it's really important to just keep that, because it works well with the way their brain works.
Right. Now, in the stage 3 or the A or C, do you ever do something like the newspaper and masking tape challenge or something like that, just to try and bring it one step further away?
We have actually stage A in the skill instruction when we're watching back the footage, and this is the power of the video record. The idea of that we're recording that play from last week, when we try to make a link between the skills that they're seeing that they can actually do and making, so the skills that they've actually successfully mastered and have been pulling off higher frequency during play, that's when we make connection to other contexts. And that's when we actually draw those explicit links and they talk about that as transportation. So we say, for example, a common one is a few of the students I work with, they say, taking turns is very similar to when in physical education or PE, we're playing basketball, for example. This is when we'd use that skill. And say, well, why would you use that? And then they would think, that's when they get stuck. And that's when we'd actually say, well, a bit like in the gaming, relate it back to what they know, the context they know. Like, just like there's only one player can play as Mario in Super Mario 3D World, it's a bit like there's only one ball. So only one person can have the ball at a time. But it's much faster to move that ball if you throw it to someone else than to trying to dribble it up. It's much more effective. And they make those connections between taking turns in the game and taking turns in a basketball game. It actually helps them with relating it back to those video game analogies. It makes sense. They can kind of see the purpose, even if they don't necessarily understand the context of basketball or waiting to use the stick tape dispenser in a classroom and why you take turns. If you relate it back to only a certain number of people can fit on a platform in a game, only a certain number of people can take sticky tape off the dispenser at a time, then they get it.
Yeah.
We found they understand. They may not understand why they're doing something, but they understand the importance in terms of how they feel and how other people may feel if they push in front and take the sticky tape before someone else. That's really important. That it may not still, they still may not understand. It may not be meaningful to them, but they understand it's important, and they understand the emotional response other people may have if they don't follow that sort of social convention.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today live. I've really enjoyed my conversation with you guys, and there's so much more I want to know, but I have to be cognizant of your time. So if people want to find you, it's nextlevelsocialskills.com.
.com, yes.
And you're on Facebook and definitely reach out. It's a great program, and I am definitely going to be following up more. Thank you so much for joining us.